working now? There we go. Right, let's share that, since it might be a minute before anyone shows up. There we go. Yeah. What's the word for it? Because I've got the app on my phone, it's harder to share the link to the Twitch directly, because of course when you click on the link anywhere except inside of Discord, which gives you an option to copy the link, you will be just catapulted straight into the Twitch app, which is not going to be helpful in that specific moment. I'm probably going to wait until the first person shows up. On the one hand, I kind of don't want to read it just to myself, but also on the other hand, I suppose I am going to put that on YouTube later. Kind of wish that I could just record it on my computer, but unfortunately, because I just had like really no need, I never got myself a decent webcam or any cam of any sort really. So while I've got actually a pretty decent microphone connected, I don't have anything for the visual processing or whatever. Which means that whatever this iPad does, hopefully better be good enough. Oh, I think we've got one person. Of course, because I'm streaming it from an iPad, I can't really see anything beyond the rudimentary. Oh, here's one number, and also here's your chat. But like, I can't get into the details of it. Like, for example, who might be um, who might be in the room at the given moment. Well, it's not even 2 o'clock yet. I'm very bad at getting this done right on time. So yeah, but hopefully it's going to be fine. And if you hear any weird noises, probably my rats who are scuttling about in their cage. I'd love to show them to you, but they don't like to be handled very much. So mostly they have to come out on their own accord, and then you have to still be very careful because they don't bite, but they get very nervous, I suppose, and very squeaky. And the thing is that if you're hearing a rat squeak, he's probably displeased. I'm not gonna say that that a rat is if a rat is squeaking, it's uncomfortable or in pain. Oh, hello. Yeah, no problem. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Stevie. Thanks for coming to say hi. Oh, we've got 3 people even. Okay. I'm not 100% sure. Ah, thank you. That's lovely. I really appreciate that. Well, and if you do want to, like, again, this is kind of a particular type of sci-fi, which is well, I suppose it's a comedy sci-fi, but it's a particular kind. That's okay. Don't worry. Thank you. I do appreciate you swinging by anyway. I really do. I'm probably gonna go ahead and start. Now, where did I put it? Oh yeah, and I should probably finish talking about rats. Right. So, rats squeak because rats, when they are pleased, they squeak at much higher frequencies than we can hear. Unfortunately, which well, it is what it is. But if they so you would need like special equipment to record that, and then possibly like bring that down to a range with it where you can hear that. And when they are displeased, they squeak at the frequencies that we can hear. And I'm not going to say that this is because they are in pain, because Soda, one of my rats, is incredibly dramatic and just squeaks all the time whenever his brother, he's got a brother whose name is Biscuit, and Biscuit is the larger rat, so he would sometimes just invade Soda's personal space, and uh, uh, Soda will let you know that he's displeased. He will squeak all the time if he doesn't like something, and he's definitely not in pain. Anyway, let's get it started. So this is the Star Diaries, a collection of short stories by Stanisław Lem, a Polish futurologist, philosopher, and relatively famous sci-fi author. I say relatively because you probably wouldn't have necessarily heard of him, even though his book called Solaris was adapted three times, twice by Russian directors and once by I think an American one. I'm not entirely sure, but that's the most recent one. And also, it's pretty bad because Stanisław Lem wrote a lot of. He wrote a lot of hard sci-fi, which often is grounded in theoretical physics. So when they made the movie Solaris, they kind of completely disregarded what the book was about and just focused the entirety of it on the relationship of the main character and his dead wife. Um, Spoilers, I guess? Anyway, yes. So, one of the things I should probably mention is that we probably need a trigger warning for this one because it's going to have some unpleasant medical dictionary terms, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's really difficult to explain because it's a very specific type of language used in a very specific way. Bottom line is, if you are sensitive to like almost medical descriptions of let's say unpleasant species, you probably want to skip this one. But yeah, let's get to it. The Eighth Voyage. Well, it finally happened. I was Earth's delegate to the United Planets, or more precisely, a candidate, though this isn't right either, since it was not my candidacy, but all humanity's which the General Assembly was going to consider. Never in my life did I feel so nervous. My tongue was thick, my mouth dry, and when I walked out onto the red carpet spread from the astrobus, I couldn't tell whether it or my knees were gently buckling under me. Speeches would have surely be to be given, but I was too choked with emotion to stammer out a single word, so that when I caught sight of a large shiny machine with a chrome counter and little slots for coins, I hurriedly inserted one, placing the cap of my thermos underneath its spigot. This was the first interplanetary incident in the history of human diplomacy on the galactic level, since I had taken for a soft drink vending machine turned out to be deputy chairman of the Roach Federation in full regalia. By a great stroke of luck, the Roaches happened to be the ones who had offered to sponsor our candidacy at the meeting, though I didn't know this at the time, and when that high dignitary spat upon my boots, I took it as a bad sign, while in fact it was only the aromatic secretion of his salutation glands. All this I understood after swallowing an informational translational pill handed me by some sympathetic UP official. Immediately, the jangling sounds around me changed in my ears to perfectly coherent words. The quadrangle of aluminum bowling pins at the end of the plush carpet became an honor guard, and the roach that greeted me, till then looking more like a very large pretzel, seemed an old acquaintance whose appearance was in no way unusual. But my nervousness remained. A small trundler pulled up, constructed especially for the convenience of biped creatures such as myself. The Roach accompanying me squeezed in after me with difficulty, and, taking a seat to the right as well as to the left of me, said, "Honourable Earthling, I must inform you that a slight procedural complication has taken place. The actual head chairman of our delegations, the most qualified to promote your candidacy, being a specialist earthist, was unfortunately recalled to the capital last night, and I am supposed to replace him. You are familiar with the protocol?" "No, I haven't had the chance," I muttered, trying to, without too much success, to make myself comfortable in the chair of the trundler, which had not been completely adapted to the needs of the human body. The seat was more like a steep pit, practically 2 feet deep, and on the bumps my knees touched my forehead. "Never mind, we'll manage," said the Roach. His flowing robe, pressed into rectangular shapes and that glittered metallically, and which I had mistaken earlier for a refreshment stand, hummed softly as he cleared his throat and continued. "Of course, I am well acquainted with the history of your people. Indeed, to be so informed is one of my duties. And truly, what a magnificent thing it is, this humanity. Our delegation will move, item number 83 on the agenda, that you be accepted as official members of the Assembly with full rights and privileges accruing thereunto. You haven't by any chance lost your certifications papers, have you?" he asked so suddenly that I jumped and strenuously shook my head. The roll of parchment in question, somewhat limp with sweat, was clutched in my right hand. "Good," he said. "So then, yes, I shall deliver a speech depicting your great achievements. Achievements which entitle you to take your rightful place in the Astral Federation. This is, you understand, a kind of ancient formality. I mean, you don't anticipate any opposition, do you?" Well, no. I don't think, I mumbled. "Of course not. The very idea. So then, strictly a formality. Nonetheless, I will need certain information, facts, you understand, details. Atomic energy, one might assume you already have at your disposal?" "Oh, yes, I eagerly assured him. "Marvelous. But what? Wait, I have it right here. The head chairman left me notes, but his handwriting, Well, and for how long have you availed yourselves of this energy?" "Since the 6th of August, 1945. "Excellent. What was it, the first power plant?" No, I replied, fearing myself blush. "The first atomic bomb. It destroyed Hiroshima." "Hiroshima? A meteor?" Not a meteor, a city." "A city?" he said, uneasy. "In that case, how to put it?" He thought for a moment. "No, it's best to say nothing," he decided. "All right, fine. But I must have something to praise. Come on now, think hard. We'll be there in a minute." Space travel?" I began. "That is self-evident. Without space travel, you wouldn't be here now," he explained, a little testily, I thought. "To what do you devote the bulk of your national revenue? Try to recall any grand feats of engineering, architecture on a cosmic scale, gravitational solar launchers, well?" he prompted. "Yes, that is, work is underway," I said. Government funds are rather limited, and most of it goes into defense." "Defense of what? The continents? Against meteors? Earthquakes?" No, not that kind of defense. Armaments, armies." "What is this, a hobby?" Not a hobby. Internal conflicts," I muttered. "This is no recommendation," he said with obvious distaste. "Really, you didn't come here flying straight out of the cave. You learned ones must have realized long ago that planetary cooperation is invariably more profitable than struggle for loot and supremacy. They did. But there are reasons of historical nature, you see. We are getting nowhere, he said. I am here, after all, not to defend you as if you were on trial, but to commend, applaud, speak highly of your, enumerate your merits and your virtues. You understand? I understand. My tongue by now has been as stiff as if someone had frozen it. Starched collar of my dress shirt choked me. Its front was all damp with the sweat that was pouring from me. I cut my roll of credentials on one of the medals and tore the outside sheet. The Roach, annoyed, contemptuous, yet at the same time detached, as though thinking of other things, suddenly said, with an unexpected calm and mildness, "Ah, the artful diplomat. I shall speak instead of your culture. Of its outstanding achievements, you do have a culture?" he quickly added. "We do indeed. A splendid culture," I assured him. "That's good. Art?" "Oh, yes. Music, poetry, architecture." "So then, architecture after all," he exclaimed. "Wonderful. I must make note of that. Explosives?" "How do you mean, explosives?" "Oh, hello, Cass. I'm very good. I'm looking forward to sharing the Star Diaries because it's one of those. I would say it's one of those lost gems a little bit. It's very interesting. Because it has some. Well, it's just written in a. The thing that I think I mentioned before is that, for example, Stanisław Lem held very. Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay. If you're interested in listening to the whole thing, I'm gonna be uploading it later to YouTube. But thank you for coming in. I appreciate that. Um, oh yeah, the thought that I was having before. Stanisław Lem was kind of had a very low opinion of your typical Western sci-fi, particularly where most of the aliens were humanoid and very sort of human adjacent. Um, he got mad beef with Philip K. Dick up to the point where Philip K. Dick reported him to CIA because, of course, this was all during the Cold War. Anyway, yeah, so I shall speak instead of your culture, of its outstanding achievements. You do have a culture, he quickly added. We do indeed, a splendid culture, I assured him. That's good. Art? Oh, yes, music, poetry, architecture. So then, architecture after all, he exclaimed. Wonderful, I must make note of this. Explosives? How do you mean explosives? Creative detonations controlled to regulate the climate shift, continents, riverbeds. You have that? So far, only bombs, I said, then added in hesitant whisper. But there are many different kinds napalm, phosphorus, even with poison gas. That's not what I had in mind, he said coldly. Let us stick to the intellectual life. What do you believe in? This Roach, who was supposed to recommend us, was not, I finally realized, a specialist in earthly affairs. The thought of our fate would shortly be decided by the appearance of a creature of such ignorance before the forum of the entire galaxy. Well, it took my breath away. What rotten luck, I thought, they would have to recall that head chairman, the atheist. We believe in universal brotherhood, in the triumph of peace and concord over hatred and war. We consider that man should be measure of all things. He placed a heavy claw on my knee. Why man? He said. Well, never mind. Still, your catalogue is negative. The absence of war, the absence of hatred, by that's all nebular. Have you no positive ideals? It was stifling hot. We believe in progress, in a better tomorrow, in the power of science. At last, something, he cried. Science, yes, good. That I can use. And on which sciences do you spend most? Physics, I replied. Research into atomic energy. Look, I'll tell you what, say nothing. Let me do the talking. I'll handle this. Leave everything up to me, and chin up, he said, as the machine stopped in front of the building. My head was spinning. Things swam before my eyes. I was led down the crystal corridors. Invisible barriers of some kind flew open with musical sighs. Then I was plunging down, then up, then down again. The Roach stood at my side, immense, silent, wrapped in the folds of metal. Suddenly everything came to a halt. The glass balloon in front of me bulged, then burst. It was standing in the bottom of the hall of the General Assembly. The amphitheater, spread out in funnel fashion, went swirling up in a circular tiers of seats, immaculately white, dazzling. In the distance, and tiny silhouettes of the delegations were sprinkles of emerald gold and crimson along the spiraling ivory levels, strangely scintillating myriads it hurt to look upon. At first, I was unable to distinguish eyes from medals, limbs from their artificial extensions. I only saw that they were moving rapidly, reaching across the snowy desks for sheaves of documents. Oh, I need some water. Sprinkles of emerald, gold, and crimson along the spiraling ivory levels, strangely scintillating myriads it hurt to look upon. At first, I was unable to distinguish eyes from medals, limb from their artificial extensions. I only saw that they were moving rapidly, reaching across the snowy desks for sheaves of documents, black and shiny things like tiles of anthracite, while directly opposite me, a distance of some 50 or 60 feet, flanked by walls of electronic machines, the Secretary General sat atop a dais in the middle of a forest of microphones. Snatches of conversations floated in the air, conversations conducted in 1,000 languages at once, and the stellar dialects ranged from the lowest basses to notes as shrill as the chirping of birds. With the feeling that the floor might open up beneath me, and in a minute I pulled at my tuxedo straight. A sound rang out, reverberating endlessly. It was the Secretary General setting in motion a machine that swung a mallet at a slab of solid gold. The vibrations made my ears throb. The Roach, towering above me, pointed to my place as the voice of Secretary General boomed from unseen loudspeakers. But before sitting down, by the rectangular sign that bore the name of my native planet, I scanned the curving rows of seats higher and higher, trying to find at least one kindred soul, at least one creature of humanoid appearance. In vain. Enormous shapes, lush tuber-like coils of aspics, currant jelly, fleshy stacks, pedunculations propped against the desk, faces the color of well-seasoned meat pies, or gleaming like rice fritters, knots, pads, mandibles, pseudopodia, holding the fates of stars both far and near. All passed before me as if some slow-motion film, nor was there anything monstrous about them. I experienced no revulsion, contrary to the suppositions expressed so often back on Earth. As I thought, I, were not dealing with cosmic horrors, but beings that had emerged from beneath the chisel of some abstractionist sculptor, or perhaps gastronomic visionary. "Item number 82, hissed the Roach in my ear, and took his seat. I did the same. Picking up the headphones that lay on the desk, I listened in. "The appliances which, pursuant to the treaty ratified by this esteemed assembly, were in full accordance with the terms specified in the treaty, delivered to by the Altair Commonwealth to the Sexpartite Alliance of Fomalhaut, have displayed, as was confirmed by the report of the ad hoc subcommittee of the UP, certain properties which cannot be accounted for by minor deviation from the technological prescription agreed upon by the esteemed parties involved. Granted, as Altair Commonwealth correctly notes, the radiation sifters and planetary regulators it manufactured were indeed supposed to possess the ability to reproduce, guaranteeing thereby creation of machine progeny, which was duly provided for in the contract drawn up between both of the esteemed parties involved. Nevertheless, that potentially should have taken the form in compliance with engineering code of ethics that binds all members of federation of individual budding and not resulted from endowment of the above mentioned mechanisms with programs of opposing signs, which unfortunately did take place. This programmed polarity led to the creation within the main energy compounds of formaldehyde of prurient tensions, and as a consequence of these scenes that were not only offensive to the public morality, but which entailed serious material losses for the plaintiff party as well. The delivered units, instead of attending to the work they had been designed to perform, devoted most of their shift to partner selection, whereby the constant running of with plugs for the purpose of recreational coupling led to violations of the Panundrian statute and ultimately mechanographic overcrowding, for both of which regrettable phenomena the defendant party is to blame. And so we hereby declare that the death of the Altair null and void. I put down the phones with a splitting headache. To hell with these machines, offending the public morality, Altair formaldehyde and all the rest of it. I had enough of the UP and I wasn't even a member yet. I felt ill. Why did I ever listen to Professor Tarantoga? What use of me was this awful honor that obliged me to blush for sins of the others? Instead, I should have an invisible current ran through me, for there of the enormous board flashed the digits of 83, and I felt a vigorous jab. It was my Roach, who, jumping to his claws, or perhaps feelers, pulled me after him. The sun lamps floating beneath the ceiling of the hall directed upon us a blazing flood of azure light, bathed on all sides by beams of radiance which seemed to shine right through me, and numbly clutching the thoroughly limp roll of certification papers, I heard the powerful bass of the Roach booming at my side, voluble and unconstrained, filling the entire amphitheatre, yet the content of his speech reached me only in snatches, like sea foam during a storm spraying onto one who dares lean over the pier. This marvelous earth, he couldn't even pronounce the name of my native planet properly, this noble humanity, and here its distinguished representative, elegant, amiable mammals, atomic energy released with consummate skill in the foothills of their mountains, a youthful, buoyant culture full of feeling, a deep faith in Jargondery, though not devoid of amphithribs. Evidently he was confusing us with someone else. Devoted to the cause of interstellar solidarity in the hopes that their admittance into this august body, bringing to an end the embryonic phase of their social development, though alone and isolated on their galactic periphery, plucky, independent, surely deserving. So far, in spite of everything, it's gone well, flashed the thought. He's praising us, not badly either, but wait, what's this? True, they are paired, the rigid underpinning, but one must understand, in the esteemed assembly, exception to the rule have the right to be represented too. There is no shame in abnormality. The difficult conditions that shaped the aquousness, even saline, need not to be an obstacle. With our assistance in the future, they can rid themselves of this unfortunate appearance, which the esteemed assembly, with its customary generosity, will be willing, I trust, to disregard. And so, on behalf of the Roach delegation and the sidereal union of Betelgeuse, I hereby move that humanity from the planet Oreth be recognized as a member of the United Planets, and that the honest Orthonians standing here to be accorded with therewith full rights to an accredited delegate to that organization. That is all. A mighty roar broke out, interspersed with strange whistlings, but no applause, nor could there be, for there have been any, in the absence of Hans. This din and racket abruptly subsided at the sound of a gong, and the voice of the Secretary General could be heard. Do any of the esteemed delegations intend to speak to the motion now under consideration, namely the recognition of humanity from the planet Areth? The radiant Roach, evidently extremely pleased with himself, dragged me back to my seat. I sat down, mumbling some incoherent words of appreciation for his services, when two pale green rays shot out simultaneously from different parts of the amphitheater. The representative from the Tuban has the floor, said the Secretary General. Something rose to speak. Esteemed Council, came the far yet piercing voice, not unlike sound of sheet metal being cut, but the timbre quickly ceased to occupy my attention. We have just heard from the mouthparts of Pulpit of Vortex a warm recommendation for the race of an distant planet till now unknown to these assembled here. I should like to express my keen disappointment that the unexpected absence of today's session of Sulpitor Extravor has deprived us of the opportunity to acquaint ourselves more particularly with the history, the manners, and the nature of that race, whose presence in the UP the Rochdom so eagerly desires. Now I am no specialist in the field of cosmic teratology. However, I would like to the extent of my modest abilities, to supplement that we have just had the pleasure of hearing. First of all, in passing only, parenthetically as it were, I will point out that the native planet of humanity is called not Oreth, Areth, or Arth, as was said, not out of ignorance, of course, but purely, as I am quite convinced, in the heat of the oratorical moment, but by my worthy colleague, the preceding speaker, an insignificant detail to be sure. However, the other term, humanity, which I made use of, is taken from the language of the race of Earth, the correct name, incidentally, for that obscure little planet, while our sciences designate the Earthlings somewhat differently. I trust it shall not be unduly weary this esteemed assembly if I take the liberty of giving the full name and classification of the species whose membership of the UP we are considering. Oh, and heads up, this is where the bad scientific language comes in, so if you're not easily squeaked out, I guess you're fine to go on. Quoting for that purpose from an excellent work of specialist, namely the galactical teratology of Gramplus and Xemes. The representative from Thuban opened enormous volume on his desk to the place indicated by a bookmark and read. In accordance with the accepted system of taxonomy and nomenclature, all anomalous forms found in our galaxy are contained within the phylum Aberrantia, deviates, freaks, which is divided into subphyla Debilitales, boobs, and Antisapientinales, screwheads. To the latter subphylum belong the classes Canaliacea, thuglies, and Necroludentia, corpse lovers. Among the corpse lovers we distinguish in turn the order Patricidiaceae, father beaters, Matriphagidae, mother eaters, and Lasciviaceae, abominites or scumberbutts. The Abominites, a highly degenerate form, we divide into Cretininae, clench poops, viz. Cavarium mordans, or the Chucarcas and the Chucarcas adelpite, and Horosimiae, howlmouths, with the classic example of the oak-chested, back-shouldered dullard, Idiontus erectus ximsi. A few of the howlmouths have actually been known to create their own pseudocultures. Among these are such species as Anopheles belligerens, the bung-fond tough, which calls itself Genius Pulcharimus mundanus, or that most curious specimen possessing an entirely bald body and observed by Gramplus in the darkest corners of the galaxy, Monstraturatum furiosum, the stinking Mimi, which has given itself the name of Homo sapiens. A clamor went up in the hall. The Secretary General set in motion his machine with the mallet. Stiff upper lip, hissed the Roach. I couldn't see him, but with the glare from the sun lamps, or perhaps it was the sweat getting into my eyes. A ray of hope flickered within me, for someone was demanding to be heard at a point of order. Presenting himself to the assembly as member of the Aquarius delegation, who was also an astrozoologist, he began to take issue with the Thebanyan, but alas, only on the grounds that, as a disciple of the school of Professor Hagranops, he considered the classification put forward to be incomplete. For he distinguished after his mentor the separate order Degeneratores, to which belonged the foul-jowls, upgluts, necrovores, and stiff-lickers. The application of the term monstrateratus to man he also felt was incorrect. Instead, one should follow the nomenclature of the Aquarian school, employing the more consistent term of bug-eyed bogus, aut factum abhorrens. After a brief exchange of remarks, the Tuvanian resumed his speech. The honourable representative of Rochia, urging upon the candidacy of this so-called man the wise, or to be more precise, this bug-eyed meanie, a typical example of corpse lover, failed to mention, in his recommendation, the word albumin, apparently thinking it indecent. And indeed, the word does evoke associations which propriety forbids me to elaborate on here. To be sure, the possession of even that kind of living matter carries with it no disgrace, cries of "Hear, hear." It is not in the albumin that the problem lies, nor in the bestowing upon oneself, when one happens to be a corpse-loving howler, the title of sapient human. This is but a weakness quite understandable, if not forgivable, dictated by one's amour propre. No, the problem lies not here, esteemed counsel. My attention began to blur, blank. I was catching only snatches. And even carnivorism is no one's fault if it results in the course of natural evolution. Yet the difference separating so-called man from animals' relatives is practically non-existent. Just as an individual who is higher may not claim that this gives him the right to devour those who are lower, or so one endowed with somewhat higher intelligence may neither devour nor murder the lower mentality. And if he absolutely must do this, shouts of "he mustn't, let him eat spinach." If I say he must by reasons of some tragic hereditary affliction, he should at least consume the bloodied victims in dismay, in secret, in his lair and the darkest recesses of the cave, torn by feelings of remorse, anguish, and the hope that he will be able to some day free himself from the burden of unremitting murder. But alas, is not the behaviour of our stinking meanie. It desecrates the mortal remains, chopping, stewing, skewering. It toys with them only afterwards to ingest them in public feeding places, in the presence of cavorting naked females of its species, which it serves to whet its appetite for the dead. The necessity of changing this state of affairs that cries out to the entire galaxy for revenge has never entered its colloidal head. On the contrary, it has provided itself with higher justification, which, residing somewhere between the stomach, that crypt of innumerable victims, and eternity, entitle it to continue murdering with a clear conscience. So much, then, not to take up the time of this esteemed assembly for the activities and habits of man the wise. Among its ancestors there was one that seemed to promise much. I speak of the species Homo neanderthalensis. He deserves our attention. Similar in appearance to modern man, he possessed a brain case of greater capacity, hence a larger brain, or intellect. A gatherer of mushrooms, inclined to meditation, a true lover of the arts, gentle, phlegmatic, there is no doubt that he would have made a strong candidate for membership in our esteemed organization. Unfortunately, he is no longer among the living. Would perhaps the delegate from Earth, whom we have the honor here to entertain, care to tell us what became of the ever so civilized and likable Neanderthal? I see he does not, so I must speak for him. The Neanderthal was exterminated, root and branch, wiped off the face of Earth, by our self-same Homo sapiens. And, as if the foul deed of fratricide was not enough, Earth's scholars then began to blacken the name of the annihilated victim, ascribing to themselves, and not to it, their cerebral superior, the higher intelligence. Today, we have among us here in this venerable hall, within these lofty walls, are representatives of these corpse eaters, one who is resourceful in the pursuit of lethal pleasures, a cunning architect of wholesale slaughter, and whose physical appearance inspires in us both ridicule and horror. A horror we are scarcely able to overcome. Today, we see there on that hitherto white, unsullied seat a creature that lacks even the courage of a consistent criminal, for it ever seeks to dress its bloody-strewn career with the splendor of false names, names whose true and terrible meaning may be deciphered only by the objective student of interstellar civilization. Yes, esteemed council. In point of fact, I got only fragments from the 2 hour harangue, but they were more than enough. The Tubanian created a picture of monsters wallowing in a sea of blood, and he did this without haste, methodically, opening still other learned books, records, annals, chronicles, all placed in preparation on his desk, and took hurling the materials onto the floor when he was done with them, as if in a sudden fit of disgust, as if the very pages that described us had become caked with the victim's blood. Then he turned to our recorded history. He told of massacres, pogroms, wars, crusades, genocides, and using scales and slides and full-scale charts, showed the technologies of crime, instruments of torture, ancient and medieval. When he started in on the present day, 16 assistants had to wheel in cards that groaned beneath stacks of additional documentation. Other assistants, rather UP paramedicals, meanwhile administered, from tiny helicopters, first aid to the hundreds of listeners who had grown weak during the lecture. But me they ignored, in the naive belief, I suppose, that the stream of gory details of Earth culture would not affect me in the least. But actually, about halfway through that presentation, I began, like one on the brink of madness, to fear my very self, as if thrown in among these phantasmagorical, outlandish beings that surrounded me on every side. I were the only monster. Then, just as it seemed that this horrible list of accusations would never end, the words were uttered. And now let the esteemed assembly proceed to vote upon the motion of the Roach delegation. Water. The whole fell into a deathly silence till something stirred right beside me. It was my Roach rising in the attempt, a desperate attempt, to refute at least a few of the charges made. But he put his foot in it completely when he tried to assure assembly that mankind felt the deepest respect for the Neanderthals, its venerable ancestors who had died out entirely by themselves. The Thibanian, however, demolished my defender on the spot with a single well-aimed question put directly to me. On Earth, did calling someone Neanderthal pass for a compliment, or was it instead a term of abuse? Well, it was all over now, I thought. Every hope was lost, and I would be limping home like a dog sent back to its kennel for having been caught with a little bird half smothered in its jaws. But then, in the ham and buzz of the hall, the Secretary General leaned over to the microphone and said, "The chair recognizes the representative from the Iridan delegation." The Iridan was short, silvery grey, and plump, like a puff of smoke caught in the slanting rays of the winter sun. "I would like to ask," he said, "who will be paying the Earthlings' enrollment fee? They themselves? It is a rather considerable sum of 1 billion tons of platinum. Not every applicant has that kind of metal." An angry murmur filled the amphitheatre. "Your question will be appropriate when the motion of the Roch delegation had been taken up to a vote and passed," said the General Secretary after a moment's hesitation. "With the permission of your galactitude," returned the Iridan, "I happen to be of a somewhat different opinion, and therefore wish to support the question I just raised with a few observations, which I think you shall find most relevant. I have here, to begin, with a work of that renowned consultant planetologist Hyperdoctor Frogress, and I quote from as follows: "Planets on which life cannot spontaneously originate have these distinguishing features: I. Radical climate changes in rapidly alternating sequences, i.e., the so called cycle spring, summer, autumn, winter, or those even more cataclysmic occurring at greater intervals, ice ages. B. The presence of large natural satellites. Their tidal influences also are inimical to life. C. Frequently appearing maculations on the surface of the central or mother star, as these are a source of deleterious radiation. D. The preponderance in area of seas over continents. E. Persistent glaciation in the polar regions. F. The atmospheric precipitation of water in its solid or liquid state. As one can plainly see, "Point of order!" cried my Roach, jumping up as if fired with some new hope. "I ask whether the delegation from Iridia will vote in favor of the motion or against it." "In favor of the motion, but with an amendment we shall shortly propose to this esteemed assembly," the Iridan replied, and then went on. "Revered Council, at the 918th session of the General Assembly, in this very hall, we considered the application for membership of a race of bung-brain abominoids, who presented themselves as supremius everlasters, while in actual fact their forms were so impermanent that during the above-mentioned session of the Assembly, the composition of this abominoid delegation changed 15 times, though the session itself lasted no more than 800 years. These wretched creatures, when the time arrived to submit the curriculum vitae of their races, became hopelessly entangled in contradictions, solemnly assuring the esteemed council, though, mind you, without a shred of evidence, that they had been created by a certain supreme mover, in his own perfect image, owing to which circumstances they were, among the things, spiritually immortal. Then, when it came to light that their planet fit exactly the bionegative conditions of Hyperdoctor Progress of the Joint Planetary Assembly, appointed a special investigative subcommittee, and that body confirmed that the race of screwheads under suspicion had arisen not as a result of any prank of nature, but instead due to a regrettable incident brought about by third parties. "What's he saying? Hush! Not true! Kindly remove that claw, you deviate!" went the commotion in the hall, growing by the minute. "The findings of the investigative subcommittee," continued the Iridan, "led to the passage of the next session of the UP an amendment to Article 2 of the United Planets Charter, which amendment reads as follows." He unrolled a lengthy parchment and cleared his throat. "A categorical ban is hereby imposed on the engagement of any life-initiating activities on all planets of the Progress type A, B, C, D, or E. Also, change of authorities in charge of research expeditions, as well as commandeers of ships that land upon such globes, are of now instructed to see to, and therefore held fully responsible for, the strict observance of the aforesaid ban. This includes not only deliberate life-engendering practices like the sowing of algae, bacteria, and so forth, but also the unintentional induction of bioevolution, whether through negligence or in absent-mindedness. Such contraceptives prophylaxis is dictated by the best intentions and the knowledge of the UP, and particularly in cognizance of the following fact. In the first place, the natural hostility of an environment which one has externally inoculated with microorganisms gives rise, in the course of their subsequent evolution, to deviations and deformities of sort never encountered within the domain of natural biogenesis. Secondly, these adverse circumstances produce species which are not only defective physiologically, but burdened as well with severest forms of psychic abnormality, and under such conditions there should develop beings possessing some small degree of intelligence, and this does on occasion happen. Their existence will be filled with great mental suffering, for upon attaining the first stage of consciousness, they immediately begin to search their surroundings for the cause of their own origin, and, unable to find it, there in turn turn in confusion and despair to blind delusive faiths. In particular, since normal course of evolution process in the universe is unknown to them, they take their physical shape, however hideous it may be, as well as their way, such as it is, of thinking for ordinary phenomena, entirely typical of those manifested throughout the macrocosm. And therefore, out of deep concern for the well being and dignity of life in general, and of sentient beings in particular, the General Assembly of the UP resolves and decrees whoever violates this contraceptive article of the UP Charter, effective immediately, shall be subject to sanctions and penalties pursuant to the terms of the corresponding paragraphs of the Code of Interplanetary Law. The Iridan, putting aside the UP Charter, lifted a massive volume of the code, with which nimble assistance placed in his tentacles, and opening that monumental tome to the right page, they read in a ringing voice. Volume 2 of Interplanetary Penal Code, Section 80, entitled On Planetary Incontinence. Paragraph 212. The impregnating of a planet naturally barren is punishable by no less than 100, no more than 1,500 years of full ostracism, irrespective of any civil liability for the moral and material losses of this suffered by the victims. Paragraph 213. The infraction of paragraph 212, aggravated by the conspicuous presence of malicious intent, as evidenced by manipulations of wanton nature and with premeditation, whose purpose is the evolution of life forms singularly disfigured to inspire universal fear of universal revulsions, is punishable by ostracism and the distillation of up to 1,500 years. Paragraph 214. The impregnating of a barren planet as a result of carelessness, oversight, or through the slipshod application of appropriate contraceptive measures is punishable by ostracism of up to 400 years. If the act is committed in relative ignorance or otherwise reduced awareness of its consequences, the sentence may be reduced to 100 years. I make no mention, added the Iridan, of the penalties for interfering with an evolutionary process in statu nascendi, as does not concern us here. However, I would like to point out that the Code does provide for the material liability of the perpetrators with respect to the victims of their planetary incontinence. I will not quote the relevant sections of the Civil Code for fear of altogether exhausting the patience of the members of this Assembly. I note only that in the catalogue of spheres held to be definitively barren by Hyperdoctor Progress, no less than one by the United Planets Charter and Interplanetary Penal Code, we find on page 2618, 8 line from the bottom, the following heavenly bodies: Ea, Eagron, Earlsharm, Earth, Est, Bong, Eblis. My mouth fell open. The certification papers slipped from my hand. It grew dark before my eyes. Pay attention! They were shouting in the hall. Hear, hear! Who does he mean? Down with! Long live! As for me, the degree that it was possible, I tried crawling under the desk. Esteemed Council, thundered the representative from Iridia, hurling the heavy volumes of Interplanetary Code to the floor with the amphitheater. This must have been the favorite oratorical device in the UP. We can never hear enough of the matters that bring dishonor to these who will violate the United Planets Charter. We can never brand enough those responsible elements who would beget life in conditions entirely unsuited for it. Now, here we are approached by creatures that have no inkling of the true odiousness of their existence, nor any knowledge of its cause. Now here they might come knocking at the venerable door of this worthy assembly, and what then, pray, are we to tell them, these abominations, howl-mouths, freak-snouts, clench-poops, corpse-lovers, mother-eaters, and addle-pites, wringing their alleged hands and falling to their alleged knees when they learn that in reality they belong to the subphylum Artefacta, and that their supreme and perfect creator was some ship's cook who once powered out upon the rocks of a dead planet a bucket of fermented slops of his own amusement, imparting to that wretched source of life properties which would later make it the laughing-stock of an entire galaxy. And how, pray tell, will these poor devils defend themselves when some future Cato throws to them the shameful levorotatory configuration, yes, the left-handedness of their amino acids? The hull was in all aboil in vain. Did the machine repeatedly swing its mallet? They were howling every side. For shame! Down with! Quarantine 'em! Who's he talking about? Look at the earthling dissolve. The Mimi is leaking all over. I was indeed sweating like a pig. The Iridan, raising his stentorian voice above the general roar, cried, I shall now put a few final questions to the honourable delegation from Rochia. Is it not true that many years ago there landed on then dead planet of Earth a ship carrying your flag, and that due to a refrigerator malfunction a portion of its perishables had gone bad? Is it not true that on this ship there were two space hands afterwards stricken from all registers for unconscionable double dealings with duckweed liverworts, and that their pair of arrant knaves, these Milky Way ne'er-do-wells, were named Gord and Lod? Is it not true that Gord and Lod decided in their drunkenness not to content themselves with the usual pollution of defenseless uninhabited planet, that their notion was set off, in a manner vicious and vile, a biological evolution the likes of which the world had never before seen? Is it not true that both these roaches, with malice and aforethought, malice of the greatest volume and intensity, devised a way to make Earth, on a truly galactic scale, a breeding ground for freaks, a cosmic sideshow, a panopticon, the exhibit of grisly prodigies and curios, a display whose living specimens would one day become the bad jokes told over even in the outermost nebulae? Is it not true that, bereft of all sense of decency and ethical restraint, both these miscreants then emptied on the rocks of lifeless earths 6 barrels of gelatinous glue, rancid plus 2 cans of albuminous paste, spoiled, and that to this ooze they added some curdled ribos, pentos, and levulose? As though that filth were not enough, they poured upon it 3 large jugs of a mildewed solution of amino acids, then stirred it, the seething swill, with coal shovel, twisted to the left, and also used a poker likewise bent in the same direction, as a consequence of which the proteins of all future organisms on Earth were left-handed. And finally, is it not true that Lod, suffering at the time from a runny nose and moreover egged on by the gourd, who was reeling from an excessive intake of intoxicants, did wilfully and knowingly sneeze into that protoplasmal matter, and having infected it thereby with the most virulent viruses, guffawed that he thus breathed the fucking breath of life into those miserable evolutionary beginnings? And is it not true that this leftwardness and this virulence were thereafter transmitted and handed down to Earth from organism to organism, and now afflict with their continuing presence the innocent representatives of the race artefactum abhorrens, who gave themselves the name Homo sapiens purely out of simple-minded ignorance? And therefore is it not true that the roaches must not only pay the Earthling's initiation fee to the tune of 1,000,000,000 tons of platinum, but also compensate the unfortunate victims of their planetary incontinence in the form of cosmic alimony? With these words pandemonium broke loose in the amphitheatre. I cowered. Flying through the air in every direction came portfolios, volumes of the Interplanetary Penal Code, and even material evidence, objects such as badly rust-eaten jugs, barrels, pokers, though Lord knows how they got here. Perhaps the clever Iridans, having some score to settle with the roaches, had been conducting archaeological research on Earth since time immemorial, collecting the incriminating evidence, which was all carefully stored on the board of their flying saucers. But I found it difficult to ponder such a point, for everything was heaving around me, tentacles and claws flashed past, and my roach, extremely agitated, leaped up from his seat screaming something, but it was lost to the general bedlam, while I continued to sit, as it were, in the eye of the storm, and the last thought that pounded in my brain was the question of that sneeze with premeditation which had brought us into the world. The next thing I knew, someone seized me by the hair painfully till I groaned. It was the roach, trying to demonstrate how solidly I'd been fashioned by Earth's evolution, and how little I deserved being called a paltry sort of creature, stuck together, and flimsily at that, out of rotten bits of refuse, and he walloped me over the head again and again with his enormous heavy claw. I felt the life slowly going out of me. My struggling grew weaker. I couldn't breathe. I gave a few last kicks in agony and collapsed on my pillow. Half conscious, I jumped up immediately, sat on the bed, feeling my neck, head, chest to make sure that all I had undergone was but the product of an awful dream. I heaved a sigh of relief, but then later some slight doubts began to trouble me. I told myself, for God's sake, it's only a dream. Somehow that didn't help. Finally, to dispel these gloomy thoughts, I went to see my aunt on the moon. But an 8.5 minute ride on a lunibus that stops right outside my house, no, I can hardly call this the eighth stellar voyage. More worthy of the title surely would be the journey taken in my sleep, in which I suffered for all humanity. Right, there we go, that's the eighth voyage. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to put more notices up where I can on my Twitter. You can all follow my Twitter, it's at Mazer Rackham. I'll link that in my Twitch profile. So I should be putting up my announcements where I might be reading next time there. And also, if more people will come in, maybe we can discuss some of the true head scratchers of the translation jobs. Because, I know this stuff in Polish, so I probably know about the genesis of the words, and we can, talk about it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed, and see you next time. Right, how do I... there we go, there's an end button.